The ordinary day Keanu Reeves was in no rush. The bustling streets of Los Angeles, with its endless flow of cars and pedestrians, had become a familiar blur over the years. At the height of his career, he had lived in the fast lane, attending high-profile events, movie premieres, and dinner parties with the biggest stars. But on this quiet afternoon, he was a man simply searching for a moment of peace. He had decided to visit a luxury salon that afternoon. It wasn't the sort of place where A-listers typically mingled. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of Beverly Hills, nestled between unassuming cafes and small boutiques. The kind of place where a person could blend in if they didn't want to draw attention. Keanu didn't want to draw attention today. He had learned long ago that the fame surrounding him was like a fog always swirling around, sometimes suffocating, other times barely noticeable. He craved simplicity, an afternoon away from the ever-watchful eyes of the paparazzi and the expectations of Hollywood. He just needed a little pampering and, perhaps more importantly, a break from his own constant awareness of being Keanu Reeves. Stepping inside the salon, he was met with the smell of lavender and citrus, a combination designed to soothe even the most frazzled of souls. The soft chime of a doorbell rang through the space as he entered, a sound that almost seemed designed to keep the world outside, where it belonged. The receptionist, a young woman with an eager smile, glanced up from her computer screen as he approached. Her eyes flickered briefly, as if she was trying to place him. Keanu, dressed in a simple hoodie, jeans, and dark sunglasses, offered her a friendly but neutral smile. "Hello. I have an appointment for a haircut," he said, his voice soft but carrying a calm authority. The receptionist nodded, typing something into the computer. "I'll just check you in, sir. You can take a seat. It'll be just a few minutes." Keanu nodded and followed her instructions, taking a seat in one of the plush, velvet chairs that lined the waiting area. He let out a small sigh as he sank into the cushions, his mind briefly floating away from the bustle of the city. He liked the quiet, he liked the anonymity. The salon, though beautiful, felt different from what he expected. The polished mirrors, the softly lit lamps hanging from the ceiling, the array of products on the shelves, everything screamed luxury. But there was an odd stillness in the air. The space felt as though it had been designed for a certain type of clientele, and Keanu had a brief moment of doubt, wondering if his presence here was somehow an intrusion. As the minutes passed, Keanu's mind wandered, the gentle hum of conversation between other clients and the stylists blended with the quiet sound of clinking scissors, a kind of soothing rhythm that he appreciated more than he realized. For a few moments, he allowed himself to feel like an ordinary person, someone who had simply come in for a haircut, as though he were just another face in the crowd. But then, as he watched the stylist tending to a woman in the chair across from him, he noticed something odd. The woman, who was sipping on a glass of water, turned toward him for a split second. Her eyes locked onto his for just a brief moment, and for a fleeting second, there was a flash of recognition. It passed quickly like a quiet ripple in a pond, and she went back to her conversation, leaving Keanu wondering if his presence had stirred something more than just a passing curiosity. He was used to it, of course, but today he didn't want to be recognized. He didn't want the whispers, the sudden shift in the room when someone realized who he was. Today, he was Keanu, the person, not Keanu, the actor. The idea of being treated like a regular person, just a man with a regular appointment for a haircut, felt strangely comforting. Minutes turned into 15, and then 20, and still, no one had called him back to the chair. He shifted slightly, adjusting his hoodie so that his face was hidden just a little more. His fingers tapped absent-mindedly against the armrest, and a flicker of irritation crossed his mind. He had scheduled the appointment early, after all. He was usually known for being punctual, and yet here he was, waiting. As time ticked by, he began to wonder if it was all part of the experience, perhaps the slow, deliberate pacing of luxury. Was he being tested, or was this simply the pace of life in the world of high-end salons? Either way, it wasn't what he had expected. He'd always imagined that at places like this, every minute counted, but there was a certain aloofness in the air, as though he, the customer, were a mere cog in the machine, a small detail that would eventually be addressed, Another 10 minutes passed, and he was starting to feel a little uncomfortable. No one had yet come to greet him. No stylist had made the effort to acknowledge his presence beyond the receptionist's brief exchange. This wasn't the kind of personalized attention he had expected from such an expensive establishment. It felt, in a word, impersonal. Keanu sat up straight, his fingers still tapping rhythmically. Perhaps the experience was less about efficiency and more about indulgence. But still, he wondered, was this the luxury that people sought? Was it simply the price tag that made it all worthwhile? Or was it something deeper? His mind wandered, again, pulling him back to the world he left outside film sets, interviews, world tours. The glare of the spotlight was always inescapable. But here, in this salon, he felt an odd sense of invisibility. His identity was not quite known. There was a small amount of solace in that. A slight clearing of the throat interrupted his thoughts. Keanu turned toward the front desk, where the receptionist was now looking at him with wide eyes, as if she had just noticed the man in the hoodie was not just any man. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice suddenly quivering as she stepped forward. "We're so sorry about the wait. We've had a little mix-up with the scheduling. If you'll follow me, we'll take care of you immediately." Keanu smiled and nodded, though the small flash of recognition had been enough to change the atmosphere around him. People had started to notice him now discreetly, but not enough to make it obvious. There was a sudden change in the way people moved about the salon. The stylists, who had been focused on their clients just moments before, were now casting glances in his direction, some of them hurriedly whispering to each other. Keanu followed the receptionist, silently reflecting on the strange paradox of his life. Here he was, in a place designed to cater to the most elite, yet in this moment, he felt more like a nobody than he had in years. He wasn't sure whether he was amused by the irony or just slightly disoriented by the shift in dynamics, but as he sat in the chair and began to settle in for his appointment, he allowed himself to remember one thing: he didn't need anyone else to define who he was. After all, Keanu Reeves was, above all else, just a person, and today, he was going to let himself be ordinary. The reaction of the staff. Keanu sat back in the plush salon chair, his hoodie now slightly askew as he tried to make himself comfortable. He felt the familiar, steady buzz of anticipation in the air. It was one of those subtle shifts, the kind of change that wasn't immediately obvious, but was impossible to ignore. Once it happened, the receptionist, whose name Keanu couldn't quite remember, led him to the chair with a smile that seemed forced, to practice. She adjusted her uniform, her hands a little more frantic than necessary. "We'll take care of you in just a moment, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice betraying her professional composure as it cracked just slightly with nervousness. Keanu offered a reassuring smile. "It's no problem at all. Take your time," he said, his tone calm and even, trying to ease the palpable tension in the room. He wasn't angry, but the awkwardness was beginning to make him feel out of place. Not that he didn't experience this from time to time. Being recognized had become part of his life. It just always seemed to change the energy of a room, even in places where he least expected it. A few minutes passed before one of the stylists, a woman in her early 30s with a pixie haircut and a bright smile, came forward. She introduced herself as Emily and motioned for him to relax. "I'll be taking care of you today, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice much steadier than the receptionist's. She held a clipboard in her hand, flipping through a few papers as she spoke. "You're looking for a trim, yes?" Keanu nodded, still trying to shake off the slight discomfort creeping into his mind. "Just a trim. Keep it simple." Emily's smile widened, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a spark of recognition. She stopped for a brief moment, staring at him as though she was waiting for her brain to catch up. Keanu's calm demeanor did nothing to stop the realization that was slowly dawning on her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if processing the puzzle pieces falling into place. "Oh my God," Emily finally blurted out, her voice barely a whisper. Keanu remained still, keeping his expression neutral. He was used to moments like this, though they still held a certain discomfort. The stylist immediately caught herself, flushing a deep shade of pink. She looked down at her clipboard, suddenly more absorbed in it than she had been moments before. "I'm so sorry. I didn't. I mean, of course I know who you are," she stammered, her hands now visibly trembling as she set the clipboard down. "I just didn't expect," she trailed off, unsure of what to say next. Keanu chuckled softly, a light-hearted sound that put her at ease, if only for a moment. "It's all right. Happens all the time." There was an awkward pause before Emily finally found her words. "I just never expected to see you here. Like this, you know." Her voice was more composed now, though she still seemed a little disoriented. "I mean, you're always in the news, at premieres, on billboards." She trailed off again, her tone softer as she caught herself babbling. Keanu's smile never wavered. "I'm just another guy getting a haircut," he said, trying to make the situation feel less monumental. "You don't have to treat me differently." Her eyes widened, her hands fidgeting with the towel draped over his shoulders. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable," she said, speaking with a more subdued tone now, as though the weight of the situation had finally settled on her. "I didn't mean to act weird." Keanu shook his head. "No need to apologize," he replied, his voice warm and sincere. "You're just doing your job. Nothing weird about that." There was another awkward silence, but this time Emily seemed to settle into the task at hand. As she began to work, she stole occasional glances at Keanu. She asked him about his preferred haircut style, how he liked it trimmed, but each question seemed to be accompanied by a quiet fascination, a subtle awe that he could feel but chose to ignore. He was used to people looking at him differently once they knew who he was. In fact, he was more accustomed to that than people just treating him like an ordinary customer. The other stylists, who had been working on their clients in silence, were now glancing over, some with a curious expression, others trying not to be obvious about their gaze. The salon, which had once felt like a sanctuary of calm, now seemed to hum with energy, as though a quiet storm had passed through, stirring things up. Keanu could sense the subtle shift. The atmosphere had changed, like the air before a thunderstorm charged, full of expectation. He noticed the side conversations, the lowered voices, the glances exchanged between staff members. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. The unspoken acknowledgement that the man in the chair was not just any client. Emily kept her head down, her focus more on the scissors in her hands than on Keanu. The cut was easy enough. It wasn't anything special, a simple trim, but still, she worked with an intensity that bordered on the obsessive. Keanu couldn't help but notice her movements were slightly more deliberate now, as if she feared messing up. He smiled to himself. It was moments like this that reminded him how the world could treat a person once they became famous. People, no matter how much they tried to be professional, were always caught up in the idea of celebrity. They were always looking for something more, something beyond the ordinary. And once the veil was lifted, once the real identity was known, everything changed. But Keanu had learned not to take offense. He had learned to let it go. Or still, the reactions of the staff were not entirely lost on him. He could see the subtle shift in their posture, the way they straightened their backs, the way they now moved with just a touch more grace than they had before. It was the same reaction he'd gotten 1,000 times. He wasn't sure why it still bothered him, but it did, if only a little dot, as Emily continued trimming his hair. He decided to break the tension. "So, what's it like working here?" he asked casually, trying to steer the conversation into more comfortable waters. "Seems like a pretty peaceful place." Her hands paused for a moment, and she looked at him, surprised by the question. It's all right, you know, just the usual stuff. It's a good job," she said, her tone softening. Then, after a brief moment of silence, she added, "I always wanted to work at a place like this. A place where you can make people feel good about themselves." Keanu smiled, leaning back slightly in the chair. "That's a good goal. I think that's a lot of what this work is about, making people feel good." She nodded, but then her eyes shifted to the mirror, and she sighed. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm just here to cut hair. Like, I do it because I'm good at it. But it's not always fulfilling, you know?" Her voice held a trace of melancholy that she couldn't quite mask. Keanu's eyes softened, sensing that there was more beneath the surface. "I get that," he replied, his voice gentle but filled with understanding. You're looking for meaning in what you do, something that goes beyond the everyday. But sometimes, the smallest things like making someone feel good about themselves are the biggest things you can do. Emily seemed to pause at his words, as though they were sinking in. She looked at him in the mirror for a moment before speaking again. "Yeah," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "I guess I never thought of it that way." Keanu nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's not always the big things that matter," he said softly. "Sometimes it's the little moments, the ones no one else notices." For a few minutes, the salon fell into a comfortable silence. Emily finished trimming his hair, her movements more fluid now, more natural. As she brushed off the stray bits of hair from his shoulders, she gave him one last smile. "There," she said, her voice lighter than before. "All done. How's that?" Keanu glanced in the mirror, nodding. His hair looked perfect, simple but just right. It was the kind of cut that didn't draw attention, just fit in with who he was. "Looks great. Thanks," he said, his smile genuine. But it was Emily's smile that stuck with him. It wasn't the smile of a fan who had finally realized who he was. It was the smile of someone who, for just a moment, felt seen, not because of who he was, but because of the conversation they'd shared. The real, human connection that happened when the noise of the world faded away. And in that brief exchange, something shifted in Emily. She had come into this with nervous energy, unsure how to navigate the presence of a famous figure. But by the end, she had discovered that Keanu was just another person, someone who understood what it meant to struggle with finding fulfillment in an everyday life. Keanu left the salon with a lighter step, feeling like he had made a small difference. The world outside was still chaotic, still demanding, but in this moment, he had managed to carve out something that felt real. And for him, that was enough. As he stepped out into the sunlight, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, it was the simplest, most ordinary moments that had the power to change everything. A man of the people. The world outside the salon felt like a different realm altogether. As Keanu stepped out into the warmth of the afternoon sun, the cacophony of the city hit him like a tidal wave. Cars honked, pedestrians jostled one another on the crowded sidewalks, and the sounds of street vendors mixed with the occasional distant siren. The tranquility of the salon seemed like a distant memory, and the familiar buzz of city life was immediately overwhelming. But Keanu didn't mind it. In fact, he welcomed it. It had been too long since he'd felt truly connected to the raw pulse of the world outside his carefully curated life. The truth was, despite his fame, he had always longed to blend and to be just another face in the crowd. The fame, the money, the constant attention had come with its own set of complications. He didn't often get a chance to just be. He adjusted the collar of his jacket and began walking down the street. The usual whispers of recognition starting to swirl around him. People passed by, some of them catching a glimpse of him, others pretending not to notice. It was a familiar dance, one that had been playing out in his life for years. The recognition, the polite nods, the tentative glances dot as he walked. A small group of people stopped to stare, their eyes widening in recognition, and a few of them quietly murmured his name. Keanu didn't mind this, though. He never let it go to his head. He had always been a believer that fame was a fleeting thing, something that came and went in waves. Today, the tide of attention seemed calm enough. What mattered, Keanu thought, was how he treated people in those moments of recognition. It wasn't about signing autographs or posing for pictures, though he didn't mind doing that on occasion. It was about how he engaged with them, how he made them feel. And today, he was feeling a shift in himself, a deep sense of wanting to be present, to connect. He turned into a small cafe down the street, a quiet place he had often frequented when he needed to escape the chaos of his life. The barista behind the counter gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. Keanu had been here enough times to know that this wasn't a fan smile, but one of genuine recognition, the kind of smile that came from understanding that someone was simply a regular customer in a world that often treated him as anything but. "Keanu, right?" the barista asked casually, as he prepared his usual black coffee, strong, no sugar. Keanu nodded. "That's me," he said, his tone light and friendly, but with a certain warmth that made it clear he wasn't bothered by the recognition. "How's your day going?" The barista's smile widened. "Good, good. Busy as usual," he replied, leaning over the counter as he handed Keanu his coffee. "You know, it's crazy people come in here all the time asking for your autograph. And I always tell them the same thing. You're just a guy like the rest of us." Keanu chuckled softly, taking the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I try to be," he said, as he turned toward a small corner table. "It's easy to forget that sometimes." The barista's gaze followed him briefly before he returned to his work. There was something about Keanu's presence that felt different from the other celebrities who came through. It wasn't about the fame. It wasn't even about the movies. It was the way he carried himself, a quiet humility, a sense of peace that made you feel like you were having a conversation with someone who truly understood you. It was clear that Keanu didn't seek out the limelight. He didn't need to be the center of attention. Instead, he gave his attention to the people around him. At the corner table, Keanu took a sip of his coffee and settled in, gazing out the window at the busy street. He wasn't in a rush today. There was something about being able to just be, without the pressure of expectations or the weight of his public persona. He wanted to experience life in its simplest form like anyone else. It wasn't long before a young woman approached his table. She was holding a coffee of her own, and she seemed hesitant, unsure if she should even bother him, but she had been watching him from across the room, and the curiosity was too much to ignore. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Keanu looked up, meeting her gaze. Are you Keanu Reeves?" Keanu smiled warmly. "I am," he said, his tone gentle. "But I'm also just a guy having a coffee, so don't worry. I'm not going anywhere." The woman blinked, surprised at how relaxed and open he seemed. "I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to say that I love your work. It's kind of silly, but I feel like I grew up with your movies. I think a lot of people do. You've been a huge part of my life, and it's amazing to meet you." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you. I'm glad you found something in my work that resonated with you. But remember, we all grow up with something or someone, right? We all have people in our lives who influence us, even when we don't realize it." The woman hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'm going through a tough time right now. A few months ago, I lost my job, and I've been struggling to find my way. Watching your movies, especially the ones where your character doesn't give up, has kept me going. It sounds silly, but it's like you're telling me to keep going, to not give up on myself." Keanu's expression softened as he set his coffee down. "It's not silly at all," he said quietly. "I think we all go through difficult moments. We all face challenges that seem insurmountable. But what I've learned is that sometimes it's the smallest things that keep us going. The little moments, the people who believe in us even if we don't always believe in ourselves." The woman looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You have no idea what that means to me." Keanu nodded, his voice steady and comforting. "It's my pleasure," he said. "You've got this. You're stronger than you think." With that, the woman gave him a small, grateful smile and walked away, leaving Keanu to reflect on the conversation. He hadn't expected to have such an intimate moment in the middle of a bustling cafe. But then again, life had a way of surprising him. It wasn't the first time someone had shared a personal story with him, nor would it be the last. But every time it happened, he was reminded of something important: the power of human connection. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about the ability to listen, to empathize, and to offer a small bit of comfort in a world that often felt overwhelming. The truth was, Keanu hadn't always been so grounded. He had, in his younger years, chased the validation that came with fame. He had enjoyed the limelight, the praise, the accolades. But as time went on, he began to see how fleeting it all was. He started to realize that the only thing that truly mattered was how he treated others, how he made people feel. He sat back in his chair, reflecting on that as he took another sip of his coffee. The world around him continued to rush by, but in this moment, in this small cafe with people he had never met, Keanu felt a profound sense of peace. He had always been someone who had a deep sense of empathy for others. He understood the struggles people faced because, in many ways, he had faced them too. Fame didn't insulate him from pain or hardship, but it had given him something else, a platform to speak, to connect, to make a difference in the lives of others. And that, he realized, was far more valuable than anything else. Transforming the atmosphere, the bustling city of Los Angeles, with its constant hum of activity, was always a mixture of chaos and order, of contradictions that made up the very fabric of the city. But for Keanu, today felt different. Walking out of the cafe, where a brief but meaningful conversation had unfolded, he felt a rare kind of serenity settling into his chest. The world around him was still the same, fast-paced, noisy, unpredictable, but somehow, the weight of it didn't feel as heavy. He had learned over the years that true peace didn't come from escaping the world. It came from understanding it, from choosing how to respond to it. And as Keanu walked down the street, his hands stuffed in his hoodie pockets, his footsteps felt lighter. He didn't know why today felt different, but there was a quiet knowing within him that he was exactly where he needed to be. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the city's skyline. Keanu's thoughts drifted back to the moments he'd spent in the salon earlier. Despite the awkwardness of the initial recognition, he had sensed something shift within the staff. Their nervousness had been replaced by a quiet admiration, their hurried energy replaced by a sense of calm. It was like the moment when the storm clears and the sun shines through. Keanu had always been one to observe. He was used to people reacting in a certain way when they found out who he was. But there was something about the salon, the way its staff had interacted with him, that had left a deeper impression. It wasn't the typical rushed politeness that came with a celebrity visit. Instead, it had been something more human, something real. As he neared the intersection, a thought occurred to him. What if he could do more than just be a passive observer? What if he could actively influence the atmosphere, the energy of the room? What if, in his own quiet way, he could shift the course of someone's day just by sharing a bit of himself? Keanu didn't wait for the answer to crystallize in his mind. He knew instinctively what needed to be done. He decided to return to the salon. As he re-entered the salon, the soft chime of the doorbell was accompanied by the murmur of hushed voices. The atmosphere inside had already shifted. People who had previously seemed consumed with their work now exchanged discreet glances. There was a slight, unspoken energy in the air, a tension and electric buzz that had been absent before. Keanu felt it immediately. He wasn't sure how long it would last, but he could sense that the room had changed. It wasn't just the recognition that made people nervous, though. It was the anticipation, the self-consciousness of knowing that someone famous was in their midst. It was the pressure to be on in a way that made people feel slightly off-kilter, like they had to be more than themselves, more than human. He had to shift that dynamic, not just for his sake, but for theirs. He had seen it before, the way that fame could create a barrier. Even in the most ordinary of settings, people would often put up a facade when they encountered someone famous. The small talk would become forced, the actions exaggerated, as if they were performing rather than simply being. Walking back toward the front desk, Keanu caught the receptionist's eye. She was standing by the counter, her face flushed from what was clearly a bit of nervous energy. When she saw him, she hesitated, a small blush rising to her cheeks. Keanu smiled, walking toward her in an unhurried manner. "Hey," he said softly, his voice carrying a gentle warmth. "I wanted to thank you for handling everything earlier. I know it's not every day you get a celebrity coming through the door." She looked at him, blinking a little, as though processing his words. "Oh, you're welcome," she replied, still a little uncertain. "I just didn't expect you to be so normal." Keanu's lips curled into a soft grin. "Normal, you mean? Not the guy you've seen on posters and magazine covers?" "Well, yeah," she said, her voice more relaxed now. "I mean, you're still you. It's just, I don't know, a little hard to believe you're really here. You seem so different than how we see you in the media." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. The media makes a lot of assumptions about people, you know. They tell one story, and that's all people see. But we're all just people, aren't we? Same struggles, same joys." Same need for connection. She smiled, a real smile this time, as though Keanu's words had cracked something open in her. I guess I never really thought about it like that, she said, almost to herself. I just assumed. Well, I don't know what I assumed. Keanu leaned against the counter casually. You're not alone. A lot of people think that way about famous people. But the truth is, we're not so different. We all wake up, deal with our challenges, try to do our best. It wasn't a grand speech. Keanu didn't need it to be. His words were simple, but they carried a certain weight, not because they were profound, but because they were genuine. The receptionist nodded slowly, her expression softening as she processed his words. And you know, Keanu continued, his tone lightening, sometimes I think the people who are really successful aren't the ones who have the most money or the most fame. It's the ones who can still treat others like people, like real, ordinary people. Her eyes widened slightly, as if the truth of his statement had just sunk in. Yeah, she said quietly, almost to herself, I think you're right. Just then, Emily, the stylist who had cut Keanu's hair earlier, approached, holding a towel and a bottle of shampoo in her hands. She had clearly been listening to the conversation, and as her gaze met Keanu's, there was a hint of surprise in her expression, as though she couldn't quite reconcile the celebrity she had recognized earlier with the person standing in front of her now. Keanu, Emily said, her voice warm but still laced with a touch of nervousness. I just wanted to thank you too, for, not making a big deal out of things. Most people would have been upset, but you were just so calm. Keanu gave her a soft smile. It's all good, he replied. We all make mistakes. It's how we handle them that matters. There was a brief silence, a moment of reflection. Then Emily spoke again, her voice a little quieter. I don't think I've ever had a conversation like this before. Not with someone like you. Someone like me? Keanu asked, his brow raised slightly. Yeah, she said, her voice almost hesitant. I mean, I know who you are, but it's not like I expected you to be so down to earth. You're not like the others who come in here, Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice warm. I think the thing is, we're all just people. We're all trying to figure out this thing called life. Fame doesn't make anyone any more special than anyone else. Emily's face softened, and she seemed to hold onto his words, as if they were something she hadn't heard before, and were sinking in deeply. As Keanu stood there, he realized that the shift he had sensed earlier wasn't just in the air, it was in the people around him. They were starting to relax, starting to see him as something more than a figure on a screen. They were beginning to see him as just another person, a person who had found peace, not in running away from the world, but in choosing to be a part of it. In that moment, Keanu understood that his presence, in some subtle way, had transformed the atmosphere of the Salon. No longer was it a place where people were tiptoeing around their perceptions of him. It was a place where they could be themselves, just as he was being himself. And in that space of honesty and connection, the air felt lighter. Keanu smiled to himself as he made his way toward the door, the soft buzz of conversation continuing behind him. He knew that today, his presence had made a difference, not just by being a celebrity, but by simply being human. And sometimes, Keanu thought, that's all it really takes. Ask Jacket. The humble gesture, the soft evening light filtered through the large windows of the salon, casting a golden hue over the room as the sun began its descent behind the city skyline. The steady hum of the bustling street outside had softened, now replaced by the quiet murmur of staff preparing for the end of their shifts. The salon, once filled with the low clatter of scissors and hairdryers, had taken on a more subdued atmosphere. The energy had changed again, but this time in a more deliberate way, as though the very air was thick with something beyond the usual quiet professionalism. Keanu leaned against the counter, casually sipping on a bottle of water. He had spent a while just observing, content in his own thoughts, watching the staff go about their work. The salon was nearing its closing hour, but there was no rush. Keanu could feel that something in the space had shifted, something deeper than a simple interaction or exchange of words. The conversations that had happened earlier, the moments of openness, had left a mark on the staff, just as they had on him. Keanu had come back to the salon that day not just for the haircut, but for something more personal, something he hadn't quite expected. When he had first walked in, he had been hoping for a quiet, undisturbed experience. But now, as the day wound down, he felt that he had become part of the fabric of the place. And it wasn't because he was a famous actor. It was because he had allowed himself to be fully human, fully present, in a way that seemed to transform the people around him. Emily, the stylist who had cut his hair earlier, had been working diligently. At another station, her hands moving fluidly as she worked on another client. Keanu had noticed that, though she had been professional and friendly, she still seemed a little unsettled, like she was trying to balance the weight of being a fan with the need to remain composed. The walls she had built around herself to protect her from the awkwardness of his presence had crumbled, but there was still a certain hesitation in her actions, a little something she was holding back. Keanu had no illusions about what fame could do to a person. It could distort relationships, make people behave in ways they wouldn't normally act. That's why he had chosen to live in a way that didn't depend on his celebrity. He wanted to be more than the sum of his roles and the glossy image that the media painted of him. And though he had already shared a few words of comfort with the staff, Keanu knew that there was something he could do to make the experience even more meaningful, to leave a lasting impression not just for them, but for himself as well. It wasn't about grand gestures. Keanu had learned over the years that the most profound actions weren't the ones that made the loudest noise. They were the ones that were quiet, simple, and full of sincerity. As the salon's soft lights illuminated his surroundings, Keanu walked up to Emily, who was finishing up with a client. "Hey Emily," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that felt genuine, not forced. She turned toward him, surprised to see him standing there. "Oh, hi," she said, a smile forming on her face. "Are you all set? Was everything okay with your haircut?" Her tone was still a bit guarded, but it had a friendlier, more relaxed edge to it now. Keanu gave her a slow smile. "Yeah, everything was perfect. In fact, I was thinking about something, and I wanted to share it with you." Emily's expression shifted from curiosity to interest. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Keanu shifted his weight slightly, feeling the slight awkwardness of the moment. But then, without hesitation, he spoke. "You've been working hard today, just like everyone else here, and I can see that this place means something to you. You care about it, about the people who come in and out. But sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the routine. We all do it, right? We start going through the motions and forget that the small things can mean a lot more than we think." Emily nodded slowly, clearly reflecting on his words. "Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she admitted. "It's hard to find meaning in what we do when everything feels so repetitive, like we're just doing the same thing over and over." Keanu nodded in understanding. "I get it. But that's when we need to remind ourselves of why we do what we do in the first place. It's not just about making a living. It's about making a difference, no matter how small it seems. People come in here to feel better, to take care of themselves. And what you do here has a ripple effect. You may not always see it, but you're touching lives, changing how people feel about themselves." Emily was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Then, with a soft laugh, she spoke again. "I guess I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I've always loved doing hair, but sometimes it feels like just a job, like I'm just making money. I think I needed a reminder that it's more than that." Keanu smiled gently. "It's easy to forget that, especially when we're caught up in the routine. But every time you do something that makes someone smile, that's a moment of real impact. And it matters." Emily looked at him thoughtfully, as though his words were sinking in. Keanu could see the wheels turning in her mind, the way she was processing the weight of his simple statement. But there was more he wanted to say. Keanu began again. "It's also about recognizing the value of what you do, not just to the people you serve, but to yourself as well. You deserve to feel appreciated, too." Emily blinked, her face softening. "I don't really expect much appreciation. I'm just doing my job." Keanu shook his head slowly, his gaze steady. "You deserve more than just the routine. You deserve to feel proud of the work you do. And you deserve to feel appreciated for the energy and care you put into your work every single day." There was a moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of stillness that spoke volumes and understanding, that didn't need to be expressed through words, but through simple presence. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, casually flipping it open. He retrieved a few bills and held them out to her. But what he said next was unexpected. "I'd like to leave you a tip," he said, his tone light but sincere, "but not just any tip. I want you to think of this as a gesture of thanks, not just for the service you gave me, but for the energy you bring to this place, for being a part of something that makes a difference, even when it feels like it doesn't." Emily's eyes widened in surprise, and she began to protest, shaking her head. "Keanu, you don't have to." He held up a hand, gently stopping her. "I know I don't have to," he said with a smile, "but I want to. You're giving more than just a haircut. You're giving people a sense of confidence, a moment of care. And that's worth something. You deserve to know that it's seen." With that, Keanu placed the bills into her hand, a quiet but meaningful gesture. She stood there. For a moment, her expression caught between surprise and something deeper, something like gratitude or perhaps understanding. She didn't know what to say, but the look in her eyes was enough. She seemed touched, almost overwhelmed by the simplicity of the act. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice catching slightly. "You really don't know how much this means to me." Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're welcome. And remember, you're not just here to cut hair. You're here to make people feel better. Never forget that." As he turned to leave, Emily stood there for a moment longer, looking at the money in her hand and then back at him. Keanu hadn't just left a tip. He had left her with something far more valuable, a reminder of her worth, of the quiet power of her work, and of the importance of acknowledging that power, both for herself and for others. Keanu stepped out of the salon, the door chimming softly behind him. The evening had fully set in, and the city around him buzzed with energy. But for a brief moment, he felt at peace with the world. He had left a small mark, not just on a person, but on a place, a space where humanity, kindness, and simple acts of recognition could change lives in ways that were often unseen. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. All he needed was to make a difference, however quietly, and today, he had done just that, and somehow, that was enough. An unforgettable memory. The day had ended, but the effects of Keanu's visit still lingered in the air of the salon like a sweet, gentle perfume. As the lights dimmed and the last client finished their service, the staff began to clean up. But there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful, and the usual chatter that marked the end of a busy day felt more like a reflection than idle talk. Even the sounds of sweeping and tidying up were slower, deliberate. Keanu had left nearly an hour ago, his departure as understated as his arrival. He hadn't drawn attention to himself, hadn't made any grand gestures. He had simply shared a moment, one that many in the salon wouldn't forget anytime soon. But it wasn't his celebrity that left an impression, it was his humanity. The way he had treated every single person in the room with kindness and respect, no different than he would have treated a stranger on the street. Emily stood behind the counter, still clutching the money Keanu had left her. She hadn't had time to really look at it, hadn't given much thought to the amount, but now, as she turned the bills over in her hand, her mind wandered back to their conversation. His words had stuck with her in a way that was difficult to explain. She'd heard a lot of motivational speeches in her life, seen countless celebrities come and go, each one with their own carefully crafted personas and public images. But Keanu had been different. It wasn't that he was trying to teach anyone something. It was that he simply was something genuine, humble, open. He didn't need to preach or lecture to make an impact. It was in his presence, in his unspoken understanding of what it meant to be a person struggling with their own doubts, their own insecurities, and in that moment, she realized she had been carrying a lot of weight that didn't belong to her. The weight of expectations, the weight of being more than just a stylist, more than just an employee. Keanu had given her permission to simply be, she sighed, a quiet breath escaping her lips as she set the money down on the counter, her fingers tracing the edges of the bill. She knew it wasn't just the tip that had moved her, it was everything that had come with it. The authenticity, the quiet encouragement, the the simple act of being seen. Across the room, another stylist, Carla, who had been working the last shift at one of the chairs, came over, wiping her hands on a towel. "So, how'd the Keanu experience go for you?" Carla asked with a smirk. Clearly trying to make light of the situation, Emily looked up, her expression soft. "It wasn't what I expected, that's for sure." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. What did he do? Give you a pep talk?" Emily nodded slowly. "Something like that." She replied quietly. "It wasn't like some grand speech or anything. It was just simple. But it hit me harder than anything I've heard before." Carla chuckled. "So, what are you gonna start quoting him at work now? Be kind, cut hair, save the world?" Emily smiled faintly, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't like that. It's just the way he treated everyone, the way he saw people. He didn't see any of us as just workers. He treated us like we were part of something bigger." Carla stopped in her tracks and took a step closer, lowering her voice slightly. "I don't know, Em. I think it's just the celebrity thing. We all get starstruck. Once the novelty wears off, it'll just be another memory." But Emily wasn't so sure. She knew herself well enough to recognize when something shifted inside her. This wasn't just another fleeting moment of awe or excitement that would be forgotten with time. Keanu's words had touched something deep inside her, a quiet truth she had been ignoring for far too long. "I don't think so," Emily said quietly, her voice stronger than she felt. "I think this one's gonna stay with me." Carla eyed her for a moment, the skepticism still on her face. But then, after a few seconds of silence, she nodded slowly. "I hope you're right." As the evening wound down, the staff began to leave one by one. The atmosphere that had once been filled with light-hearted conversation and the usual end-of-day exhaustion had been replaced by something different. There was a sense of reflection now, a quiet understanding that lingered in the corners of the room. No one had to say it aloud, but they all knew something had changed. It wasn't just the fact that Keanu had come and gone. It was the way he had left a part of himself behind, a part of himself that was relatable, accessible, and, above all, kind. For the first time in a long time, the staff of the salon felt like they were more than just the work they did. They were people worthy of recognition and appreciation, no matter what their job titles were. And it wasn't just Keanu who had made that happen. It was the way he had seen them. Each one of them, not as customers, clients, or employees, but as human beings, deserving of respect and kindness. The next morning, as Emily walked into the salon for her shift, she felt lighter. She had spent the evening replaying the conversations, reflecting on Keanu's words. She had woken up feeling more inspired than she had in a long time. There was a new energy in her movements, a new sense of purpose in her work. She didn't feel like she was simply going through the motions anymore. She felt connected to the people around her, to the clients who sat in her chair, to the team she worked alongside. The salon felt different too, as the day progressed. Emily noticed that the energy among the staff was somehow more relaxed. People were laughing more, sharing stories in between appointments, and genuinely connecting. They weren't just co-workers anymore, they were part of something bigger, something that felt a little more meaningful than it had before. In the following weeks, Emily found herself carrying Keanu's quiet wisdom with her in everything she did. She no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone, least of all to her clients. Her interactions were more authentic, more grounded. She found joy in the simple act of doing hair because she realized that, in each cut, each style, she was making a difference, no matter how small. Keanu's visit had come and gone, but it had left behind a lasting impact not just on Emily, but on the entire salon. It was a ripple effect, one that had touched everyone in the room, subtly shifting the way they saw themselves and each other. The staff felt more connected to their work, more grounded in the knowledge that what they did mattered. As for Keanu, he would never know the full extent of the impact he had made that day. He never needed to. His humble gesture of kindness and recognition had created a wave of transformation, one that would continue to ripple outward, affecting everyone in ways they couldn't fully measure. And maybe, Keanu thought, that's how real change happens, not in grand speeches or monumental acts, but in quiet moments of connection. in the way we make others feel when they least expect it. He had left the salon that evening, not knowing how deeply his visit would be felt, not realizing the lasting mark he had made on the lives of those who had crossed his path. But he didn't need to, because in the end, it wasn't about leaving a legacy of fame. It was about leaving behind a legacy of humanity, one simple, unforgettable moment at a time.